It was a dark, foggy afternoon when Amy Winehouse decided to follow a path that would lead her to an unknown destination. The city was shrouded in mystery, and the cold wind spread through the deserted streets like a disturbing presence. The sound of her footsteps echoed through the empty streets, but something inside her urged her on. A letter she had received, mysterious and without a sender, seemed to have infiltrated her mind, challenging her to discover what lay beyond that garden. Something awaited her there, something she could not ignore. The abandoned garden was located on the outskirts of town, hidden among the tall trees and moss covering the ground. It was a place few dared to visit. Rumors about it spread throughout the town, and everyone whispered about what happened when someone ventured there. But Amy, with her independent spirit and riddles, couldn't resist. The letter promised something she couldn't fully understand, but it awakened something within her, like an inexplicable attraction. She felt an invisible force, as if being called by something beyond her own will. As Amy entered the garden, the scenery became more somber and disconcerting. The trees stood like silent giants, their dry leaves whispering in the wind, creating a sense of the environment itself, as if it were alive. The fog, already covering the sky, thickened, creating an air of confinement. Every step Amy took seemed to be watched, as if the garden were more than just a physical structure, but a being with a purpose of its own. The feeling that something, or someone, was about to appear took over her body, and she didn't know whether to continue or turn back. But curiosity and the need to understand what was happening drew her forward. When she finally reached the center of the garden, her eyes fixed on a rusty iron door, which seemed to be the only possible exit or entrance. The sound of the metal creaking as she pushed against it was the only sound heard in the absolute silence of the place. The feeling of unease grew even stronger, as if Amy's every movement were amplified in the thick air. Her breathing quickened, and a shiver ran down her spine as the door opened, revealing an even more disturbing scene. A vast field covered in dry leaves and a sense of utter desolation. Whatever lay behind that door, Amy was about to find out. With the background music of her own songs playing softly in the distance, Amy felt the surroundings becoming increasingly unreal. The soft sound of her voice seemed out of place in the somber setting, as if she were being swallowed by darkness. Back to Black, with its characteristic melancholy, became an almost surreal soundtrack to the moment. But instead of comfort, the sound amplified the feeling of vulnerability. What she was about to encounter there, in the center of this haunted garden, was beyond anything she had imagined. She didn't know it, but what awaited her in that place was not just a physical encounter, but something much deeper and more terrifying. Amy Winehouse has always been a woman of mystery. Her life, marked by ups and downs, was a mix of self-exploration and despair, where her deepest emotions were reflected in her music. But something about that letter seemed different. It wasn't a simple fan mail nor a job offer. The envelope, aged and scarred, seemed to contain more than words. Something inside caught Amy's attention, as if the paper itself held an invisible weight, a hidden meaning. The letter was signed by an unknown sender, and the words written within were direct, almost like a challenge. "I know what you're looking for, Amy. Come to the garden. There, all will be revealed." Nothing more. No explanation, no hint of who the author might be. But deep inside, something ignited, a flame Amy couldn't ignore. She'd always sought answers, a way to deal with her own inner demons, and what else did she have to lose? Curiosity consumed her, and the promise of revelations about herself drew her like a magnet. When she first read the letter, an uneasy feeling washed over her, but something in her soul told her she couldn't ignore it. She couldn't just let it pass. After all, Amy's life had always been an intense search for meaning, for something beyond the surface. Perhaps, she thought, This garden held the key to something she couldn't yet understand. Perhaps it was a place of redemption, or an abyss she was willing to face. What troubled Amy most was the coincidence of the timing. For weeks, she had felt lost, as if floating aimlessly, trying to find something to anchor her. Music was no longer enough to express the turmoil she felt. She needed something deeper, something that would answer the questions she held in her heart. And there, in that letter, seemed to hold a promise of an answer, of some form of liberation. She decided then and there that she would go to the garden, unaware that this simple act would set her on the path to a dark and unpredictable destiny. However, even with the desire to discover more, the decision to go to the garden was not made without reluctance. Amy knew that in her life, choices were rarely simple or safe. She knew she might be walking into an unknown danger, but the thirst for answers was stronger. When the idea finally solidified in her mind, she prepared for the journey. But the feeling that something sinister was lurking wouldn't let her go. The invitation, rather than being a simple curiosity, seemed to carry a weight that crushed her. She didn't know it, but that garden wasn't just a place, it was a trap. As Amy entered the garden, an oppressive sensation overcame her senses. The air was dense, laden with an inexplicable weight, and the sky, already grey and cloud-laden, seemed to press in on her, as if the entire world were watching her every step. The garden was utterly abandoned, but in a way that made it all the more unsettling. The plants and trees, though seemingly imposing and green, were shrouded in a thick layer of mist, obstructing any clear view of what lay ahead. With each step, the natural sounds of the environment, like birdsong or the sound of leaves rustling in the wind, were almost non-existent. The silence, more than any sound, seemed to be screaming. As she walked further, Amy felt the garden itself was alive with an invisible force pulling her in different directions. She looked around, trying to grasp the nature of the place. The trees, with their twisted and gnarled trunks, seemed to bend toward her, as if watching her, waiting for her reaction. The ground, covered in a thick layer of dry leaves and moss, crunched beneath her feet, creating a disturbing contrast with the ethereal, shadowy surroundings. Although the vegetation was rich, there was no life there. No birds, no animals, no insects. The silence was profound, as if everything were frozen in a state of waiting. The garden seemed like a building from a bygone era, perhaps once a place of beauty and tranquility, but now it was completely dilapidated. The stones of the pathways were, with each step, the feeling of being watched intensified. Amy tried to rationalize it, telling herself it was just her mind playing tricks on her, that the dense atmosphere and silence were messing with her senses. But as she approached a deeper area of the garden, where a large tree with twisted branches seemed to be the center of it all, she could no longer ignore the feeling that something was there, hidden. Looking up, she saw a hooded figure standing out from the mist. Amy's heart raced. The figure was moving, but strangely, as if floating or gliding through the shadows. She tried to convince herself it was an illusion, a shadow perhaps, cast by the mist or the trees. But as she approached, the figure didn't disappear. Instead, it slowly approached, defying any logical explanation. And then, just as Amy felt her legs about to give out, the figure turned toward her. What she saw froze her. It was a man with empty eyes and a macabre smile, a smile that seemed out of this world. Amy's first reaction was a terrible chill running through her body, but before she could take a step, he spoke, as if he knew exactly what she was thinking. Who was this figure? Who had appeared so suddenly in the garden? What did he want from Amy? The tension was boiling over, and the feeling that something far more dangerous lay behind this encounter was becoming increasingly clear. What else did the garden hide? And what exactly did this strange, enigmatic man know about her that made their encounter so terrifying? The garden was far from just a physical location. It was the portal to something much deeper and darker. Amy didn't yet know how close she was to discovering the full truth about this place. The man stood there, standing in the shadows, his eyes fixed on Amy unsettlingly. She couldn't tell what made him so terrifying, whether it was his eyes, empty and cold as an abyss, or the crooked smile that seemed more like a reflection of evil itself. He wore a dark hood that hid much of his face, but the way he moved and the lightness with which he approached only heightened the tension in the air. Amy tried to remain calm, but her heart was pounding in her chest. She knew instinctively that this man was no mere coincidence. He was there for a reason, and that reason was likely related to the invitation that had brought her to that cursed garden. "You're finally here," he said, his voice soft and drawling, as if he were speaking, more to himself than to her. The way he said the words was unsettling, as if he knew exactly who Amy was, what she was thinking, and what had brought her here. "I've been waiting for you, Amy," he continued, his smile growing with each word. "I always knew you would come. I couldn't resist, I couldn't run away." Amy felt a shiver run down her spine. She tried to pull away, but her feet were rooted to the ground, as if the garden were rooting her there, at the mercy of this man. He seemed to have control over the environment, as if this place were truly his to command. "Who are you?" Amy asked, trying to keep her voice steady, but her throat was tight. She knew she didn't have time for vague answers. She needed to understand what was happening, or who he was, before it was too late. The man gave a low, strange laugh, almost emotionless, as if reveling in the fear he was clearly inspiring. "I am what you fear most," he said with a tone of unsettling calm. "Not just you, but everyone who crosses this garden. I am the secrets, the lies, and the horrors you never wanted to face, but always knew were there." He took a step forward, and the atmosphere around him seemed to shift, as if the garden itself became more oppressive, more suffocating. "You're afraid, Amy, not just of me, but of yourself. And that's what you'll discover here." She tried unsuccessfully to contain the panic that was gripping her body. Who was this man? How did he know so much about her? How did he know exactly what was tormenting her? Her mind was in tatters, trying to understand his words and their impact on her. He wasn't just a shadowy figure in this garden. He was an embodiment of something deeper, something she had tried to hide and ignore her entire life. "I am everything you never wanted to face, everything you tried to escape," he said again, as if reading her thoughts. "You've run for so long, Amy, but what you don't understand is that you can't run from yourself. The garden is just the beginning. I am the reflection of what you fear most, and you're about to see it all." The fear became almost unbearable. Amy felt her body go cold, her legs tremble, and a sense of despair washed over her. The garden, previously silent and shadowy, now seemed alive, pulsing with a malevolent energy. She no longer knew if what she was seeing was real or a figment of her imagination. But one thing was certain: he had the power to stir her emotions and psyche in ways she had never experienced before. He was no mere stranger. He was there to test her, to force her to face something much deeper. The man moved even closer until he was just a few steps away from Amy, who, paralyzed by fear, couldn't move. The mist shrouding the garden seemed to tighten, creating an increasingly claustrophobic space between them. He didn't seem to sense Amy's growing tension. On the contrary, his calm and assurance only fueled the feeling that he knew exactly what he was doing. He stared at her with an almost unbearable intensity, as if he were observing not just her body, but every fragment of her soul, every part of her being she tried to hide. "You think I'm here by chance, don't you?" he began, his words sounding like a veiled threat. "But I know you, Amy. I know more about you than you could ever imagine." The psychopath paused, as if absorbing his own statement. I'm a shadow of your own past, one of the countless memories you tried to bury, but which, like the garden, never truly die. Amy felt a wave of nausea. She knew his words weren't empty, but she couldn't understand what he was implying. How could he know about her life? But as he continued, a knot tightened in her stomach, and a feeling of deep unease washed over her. I was an important part of your story, Amy. The difference is, you don't remember, or perhaps you'd rather not. The psychopath's smile widened, revealing jagged teeth. You know me well, too well, in fact, perhaps even more intimately than you'd like. He chuckled darkly and looked around as if appreciating his own influence on the room. I was the one, hiding in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to reveal myself, and now that moment has arrived. The psychopath's words began to resonate in her mind, and Amy felt a shiver run down her spine. Distorted memories began to surface, vague, hazy images she couldn't place, but which felt very real. A part of her childhood, a memory of a strange, menacing man, someone she had tried to block out, someone who had perhaps been closer to her than she had ever imagined. The psychopath continued, his voice now colder and more precise, as if he were telling a story she should already know. Do you remember those lonely nights, Amy? The emptiness inside you? I was there, when you were lost, unsure of who to trust, unsure of how to handle your own emotions. I was the one who showed you the way to the dark places of your mind. He leaned even closer, as if to ensure she heard every word. I was the reflection of what you feared, what you still fear. Amy felt her breath quicken. The psychopath spoke with frightening confidence, as if he were inside her head, manipulating her memories and feelings. He held a power over her that she didn't fully understand, but she felt it. I'm the part of you you never wanted to face. The past you left behind, but now it's come to exact its toll, he said, his tone cruel. And you can't run away, not anymore. The psychopath knew exactly how to touch Amy's deepest wounds. Every word, every movement he made seemed to penetrate. Her psyche like a sharp blade, revealing layers of pain she had worked so hard to hide. The garden was no longer just a physical place, but a representation of her own tortured mind. He had managed to do the impossible. He made her doubt herself. The fear she felt wasn't just about his presence, but about what he was forcing her to confront within herself. Do you think the pain is just yours, Amy, that your scars are unique? The psychopath said with a calm that only increased Amy's despair. I'm here to show you that everyone carries something inside them, but you You are special. You carry the weight of guilt, loss, self-sabotage, and that's what I want you to face." Each word felt like a direct blow to her confidence, and Amy began to feel as if she were being shattered, one piece at a time. She felt the ground beneath her disintegrate, and reality itself seemed to be crumbling. The psychological pressure he exerted on her was almost unbearable. He wasn't here to kill her physically. His goal was far more insidious. He wanted to tear her psyche apart, to force her to relive the parts of her life she feared most. And, without her realizing it, he was succeeding. Amy began to question herself. What did he want from me? Why me? His every word made her look at her own life in a way she'd never dared before. The weight of her choices, the consequences of her own mistakes. It all seemed like a giant lie she'd constructed to protect herself. But as she looked at the man before her, it was impossible to deny what he was saying. "I am the representation of your own fear," and that terrified her more than any physical threat. "Do you remember your escapes, Amy?" The psychopath continued, with an almost inhuman coldness. "When you drowned yourself in drink, in drugs, in lonely nights, you were trying to escape something. From me, from yourself." He took a step toward her, and Amy felt as if the air around her were being squeezed. "You don't realize it, but you never escaped. You only sank deeper into an endless hole. And that's exactly what's going to happen now." His words began to swirl in Amy's head. She already knew that self-sabotage had been a significant part of her life, but she had never been confronted with the intensity with which he described it. The psychopath saw her not only as a victim of circumstance, but as someone who had willingly surrendered herself to the cycle of destruction. "You knew you could escape, but you chose to wallow in pain," he continued, "and that's what I want you to face here and now. How much do you really want to change?" Amy stood still, trying to process everything that was happening, but the weight of his words was crushing her. She felt like she was in a battle against herself, against the very version of herself the psychopath was helping to reveal. Every doubt, every mistake, every failure was being brutally thrown back at her. The garden, which had once seemed like an abandoned place, was now a battlefield where she fought against her own ghosts. The tension in the air was unbearable. The psychopath, with his insidious smile and cruel words, was now in absolute control of the situation. Amy felt like a puppet, her thoughts stunned by the psychological pressure she had been subjected to. His words still echoed in her mind, distorted and threatening. She tried to pull away, trying to gather the strength to escape, but the garden seemed to be against her, every path closing in, every shadow growing denser. It was then that the psychopath made his first physical move. So sudden and unexpected, he lunged toward Amy with terrifying speed. Before she could even react, he grabbed her by the arms, pulling her close to his body. The icy touch of his hands made her shiver. Amy tried to scream, but the pressure on her chest prevented her from making a sound. She was surrounded, her body immobilized by a force she couldn't control. Fear turned to panic, and her heart raced, desperately trying to find a way out. "You think you can get out of here so easily?" the psychopath whispered, his words like venom piercing her mind. "That's the problem, Amy. You always try to escape, but no matter where you go, I'll always be with you. I'm the reflection of what you can't escape." He chuckled softly, a cold laugh, as if he were watching something incredibly entertaining. "You can't run from me? You can't run from who you truly are?" Amy's panic turned to rage. She struggled with all her remaining strength, trying to break free from his grasp. Her nails scraped against his skin, and her feet frantically struggled to find purchase. But the man was strong, and his smile remained firm and satisfied, as if he knew he was in complete control. He seemed more shadow than human, a specter dominating her innermost fears. As he pushed her against the trunk of a twisted tree, the physical pain mingled with the psychological terror he was inflicting. Every word, every gesture, every movement was a form of torture. "You'll see, Amy," he said, his tone menacing. "I am the truth you didn't want to face, but now you have no choice. I will show you the depths of the abyss you've created within yourself." Amy felt a thread of hopelessness begin to form within her. She felt lost, trapped, in a place where her own strength seemed insufficient. She knew she needed to fight, but at the same time, the weight of his words and the psychological pressure he had instilled seemed to paralyze her. The pain he caused wasn't just physical, it cut deeper, reaching to the core of who she was. Then something inside her shifted. In a surge of survival, something resonated within her mind, a tiny flame of resistance. With a scream of fury, Amy used all her strength to push the psychopath away, managing to free herself, albeit temporarily. She ran without looking back, feeling the icy wind lashing her face as the garden seemed to crumble around her. But the psychopath remained unfazed. "You can run, but I will always be here," he shouted. "No matter how far you run, you are trapped with me." Amy ran without stopping, her heart pounding wildly, as if trying to escape an invisible prison. She didn't look back. The fear she felt drove her, but the feeling that the psychopath was always in her shadow followed her, weighing her down like an anchor. The garden, with its winding paths and bushes that seemed to grow denser with every step, was now a nightmare maze. But as she ran, something began to shift inside her, a truth she never wanted to see, a sense of inevitability. She wasn't just running from a psychopath. She was running from something much deeper. She was running from herself. Finally, she found a small clearing, illuminated by a dim light that seemed to come from within the ground itself. But what she saw there made her blood run cold. A familiar figure. It was a woman, dark-haired and anguished, who seemed to be waiting for Amy, her gaze desperate and yet familiar. The woman's face was a mixture of pain and familiarity, and it was at that moment that the truth revealed itself, crushing Amy's reality. The woman in the center of the clearing was herself, or rather, a younger, more innocent version of herself. The image reflected a past Amy, one she had tried to forget, a version of herself who carried the burdens and scars of her own choices. "You don't get it yet, do you?" Amy's younger self spoke, her voice soft and melancholic. "You always thought you were getting away from it all, but every step you took, every wrong decision, it all brought you back here. I am what you fear most, the part of yourself you rejected." The shock was so great that Amy couldn't react immediately. She stared at the version of herself, the reflection of the pain and insecurities she had tried to hide her entire life. The woman before her was not a normal human being, but a personification of her own mistakes, fears, and regrets. The part of herself she hated most, the psychopath, then appeared behind the younger version of Amy, like a shadow blending into the past. He stood there, watching, almost reveling in the pain he caused. "You know me, don't you, Amy?" he said with a sinister smile. "This girl here, she's the key. She's you, what you lost, what you chose to ignore. This part of you has been forgotten, but not for the reason you think. She wasn't forgotten because you outgrew her, but because you abandoned her. And now, she's back." Amy tried to process the words, but everything seemed to be shattering in her mind. She looked at her younger self and realized something terrible. She had forgotten who she truly was. Time, addictions, loneliness, all of it had pushed the purest version of herself into oblivion. She had ignored the roots of who she was, the memories of her childhood, the moments that shaped her into who she would become. And now in this garden, the psychopath was forcing her to face it. This pain, this anger, this loss, the younger Amy said, her eyes filled with sadness. You won't be able to move on until you accept everything you left behind. The psychopath then revealed the darkest truth of all. I'm the embodiment of your greatest regret, Amy. I'm the pain you carry, the guilt you refuse to face. The truth is, you created me. You fed me with your choices, with every lie you told yourself. The truth cut like a sharp blade. The lie Amy had told herself was simple, that she had overcome everything, that she could hide from what haunted her. But as she looked at the garden, at her younger self, at the psychopath, Amy knew it was all a lie. The pain hadn't been overcome. It had been stifled, hidden. And now it was resurfacing in a monstrous way. The air was thick, almost unbreathable, as Amy stood before the younger version of herself, the psychopath moving around her like a shadow. The macabre revelation had dealt a fatal blow to her perception of reality, and she felt as if the ground were crumbling beneath her feet. But deep inside her something began to stir, a strength, a resilience she had never known she possessed. What was at stake now was not just her physical escape, but her ability to confront what she feared most, herself. You can't run away, Amy, the psychopath said, his tone dismissive, as if he'd finally reached the point of complete control. I am you. I am your past, your choices. There's no escaping me. He approached slowly, as if each word were a death sentence for the resistance that still burned within her. After all, who are you really, Amy? A lost girl, trying to hide, to forget. You've never been able to face what you've done, but in that moment something shifted in Amy. She didn't know where it came from, but a burst of anger and clarity washed over her. She turned to her younger self, staring straight in the eye, her expression one of strength she never imagined she possessed. You're not who I am anymore, she said, her voice firm and resolute. You were who I was, but I'm not the same person anymore. I won't let myself get lost again. The younger version of Amy looked at her with sadness, but also with a glimmer of understanding, as if she knew this was beyond their control. But you'll have to accept everything I was, everything I did to move forward, the younger version said softly. You can't walk away from me, because I am you. And you have to forgive me. The younger version's words were like a blow straight to Amy's heart. She felt the pain of past choices, the weight of regret and guilt. But at the same time, a sense of liberation began to grow within her. The psychopath was right about one thing. She had hidden her wounds, her fears, and everything she had avoided facing. However, she was no longer the same. She had changed. She had learned, grown, and finally, she was ready to break free. With unexpected strength, Amy looked at the psychopath and for the first time felt no fear. He was merely a manifestation of her insecurities, her inner demons, but he no longer had control. She was no longer a victim. "You have no power over me," she said with conviction. "You never did. I'm stronger than that." The psychopath, who had until then seemed invincible, froze for a moment, his expression changing from disdain to surprise. He never imagined Amy would find the strength to face him. He tried to take a step forward, but something stopped him, as if the garden itself were now against him. Amy, her gaze firm, took a deep breath and took a step toward the psychopath. "I faced you, and now you're going to disappear." Suddenly, the entire garden seemed to shake. The ground trembled, the trees and plants seemed to move as if to aid. Amy applauding her silent victory. The once imposing psychopath began to disintegrate before her eyes, like a shadow disappearing at dawn. His words became distorted, until finally he faded away, leaving only a heavy silence in the air. Amy stood there, breathing heavily, feeling the scars of her past begin to close. She had faced her greatest fears, looked into the darkest corners of her soul, and emerged victorious. The garden, which had once seemed like a place of torture, now began to dissipate, as if it were no longer needed. The mist that shrouded it lifted, and the clearing where she stood began to light up, as if a new cycle were beginning. The silence that followed the psychopath's disappearance was heavy, almost tangible. Amy stood there, alone, in the middle of the clearing, breathing deeply as the last shadows of the haunted garden slowly dissipated. The air, which had previously seemed thick and suffocating, now seemed clearer, lighter. The mist that had enveloped the garden dispersed, as if all the evil that had haunted the place were being driven away by the soft light that was beginning to invade the space. Amy, still trembling, looked around and saw the trees receding as if watching a nightmare fade. She realized that although the psychopath had disappeared, he had left deep scars on her, not just physical but emotional. What happened there in the garden was more than a fight for survival. It was a fight for her very soul, for her very identity. Every bit of pain, guilt, and fear was challenged, and she finally had the courage to face them head-on. The internal battle she had avoided for so long had been fought, and she had won. But the real question was, and now Amy looked to the horizon, where the sky, once shrouded in dark clouds, was now beginning to lighten. The dawn light seemed to promise a new beginning. But at the same time, she knew the journey she had made to this point had not been simple or quick. The wounds the garden had exposed would not be healed overnight. She knew the healing process would be long, perhaps longer than she cared to admit. But now, more than ever, she was ready to begin. As she walked slowly out of the clearing, Amy felt a sense of renewal. It wasn't a feeling of complete relief, but of acceptance. She had faced the ghosts of her past, and in doing so, she had learned to forgive herself. The garden, which had once seemed a place of terror and suffering, now became a metaphor for the healing process. It had been a reflection of her inner journey, a place where she had to confront what she feared most, not the psychopath but herself. And now, as she walked away from him, she carried with her the strength of someone who knows what it means to be able to change. As she left the garden behind, a sense of clarity enveloped her. The scars wouldn't disappear, but the pain would begin to lessen. What she learned in that garden would make her stronger, more aware of who she was and what she was capable of. She wasn't running away anymore. She was finally moving forward. She knew that the struggle for inner peace wasn't something that could be resolved in a single moment, but she also knew that the journey of self-discovery she was beginning now would be truer and more complete than anything she had ever faced before. The haunted garden, with its secrets and terrors, was behind her. But the real battle for peace, for reconciliation with her own past, for acceptance of who she truly was yet to come. Amy Winehouse, however, knew that though the path was arduous, she finally had the power to walk it, and when she left the garden, not only had the place changed, but so had she. A stronger, truer, and ultimately freer version of herself from her own pain was about to begin her new journey.